Diablo 4 may well be a sequel to Diablo 3, but the endings could not be more different. Where Diablo 3 ended on a triumphant note that served as its own conclusion, Diablo 4's ending leaves many loose ends, and while the main villain of the story is defeated, many questions do remain. So in this video I want to discuss the ending of Diablo 4 and some of the story plots that led us to this point, as well as answer some of the lingering questions we are left with. What was Neyrelle's plan? Where is she going? And what will happen next? I think we can answer some of these questions, especially where Neyrelle is going. But before we get started guys, remember that if you enjoy Diablo lore, then consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. After creating our character, we are treated to a cinematic of our character wandering, but more importantly, a narrator tells us exactly what the story of Diablo 4 is going to be about. It's about Sanctuary's creators, Inarius and Lilith, returning to claim what they created, but also it's the story of their downfall. And indeed, by the end, both of these characters are dead. Lilith and Inarius were once star-crossed lovers, an angel and a demon, who were tired of the eternal conflict between heaven and hell. Thus they created Sanctuary, a land for those like them, those who were fed up with war, where they could hide out and abstain from the conflict. Lilith and Inarius would become lovers, and their offspring would become the half-breeds, known as the Nephilim, half angel, half demon. Fearful of their power, Inarius would sap their power, and they would become humanity. The power couple would fall apart when Lilith and Inarius fell out regarding the fate of the Nephilim. Inarius would eventually banish her to the void, but he himself was embroiled in a war in Sanctuary called the Sin War, a conflict between human worshippers of hell, known as the Temple of the Triune, and those who worshipped him, the Cathedral of Light. Eventually heaven and hell were drawn to this conflict, and as part of an armistice between heaven and hell, Inarius was given over to Mephisto, the Lord of Hatred and one of the prime evils, and of course Lilith's father. This essentially remained the fate, as far as we are aware, of Inarius and Lilith through the events of the first 3 Diablo games, Inarius imprisoned in hell and Lilith stuck in the void. But by the end of Diablo 3, all of the lesser and prime evils of hell had essentially been incapacitated, after being imprisoned in the Black Soul Stone. Through the actions of Malthael, the Angel of Death, the Black Soul Stone would be destroyed, releasing all of the evils out of the stone, but of course they would take time to reform, and thus there is a great void of power within hell at the end of Diablo 4 Reaper of Souls, which took place a mere 50 years before the event of Diablo 4. No doubt it is this power vacuum that has allowed Inarius to escape sometime in these intervening 50 years. In that time he has returned to Sanctuary and rebuilt the Cathedral of Light, this institution that went extinct a millennia ago. And through this institution he has built a power base on Sanctuary, full of devoted worshippers, as well as a mighty and fanatical army to do his bidding. More recently, Lilith too has returned to Sanctuary. She had previously been imprisoned outside reality in the void by Inarius. She has returned to our world by the designs of Elias, a fallen Haradrim, who believes that Lilith is the only divine being who is on the side of humanity, and him bringing back Lilith is the event that we see in the announcement trailer all those years ago. Thus the entire game is essentially a build-up to their final conflict. Both parents of Sanctuary returned to their plane of existence that they created. They both try and exert influence over humanity to build up followers, to achieve their aims. Inarius wants to return to the heavens, the realm that he originated from, no doubt longing for his home, all of his idealism and nuance being sapped out of him, after a millennia of being tortured by Lilith's father, Mephisto. In the final cinematic, Lilith is right about Inarius. He's no longer the conflicted being she met a millennia ago. He is just desperate and broken, and wants to go home, whereas before he was a rebel full of idealism and pride. Since returning to Sanctuary and finding his way to the High Heavens denied, he has heard the prophecy of Rathma, his son, and in his desperation he sees what he wants to see in this prophecy. Then came a spear of light, piercing Hatred's heart, and he who was bound in chains was set free.
I knew Inarius would be driven to interfere, believing that it was about him. He saw himself as a savior, piercing Hatred's heart in hell.
He sees himself as the being who is bound in chains, but he also sees himself as the spear of light, and Lilith as Hatred's heart. In general, he interprets this to say, slay Lilith, and he who is bound in chains will be returned to heaven. Yet as we know from a million fictions, prophecies are often misread. Yet despite his intentional misreading,
nothing you do will change the future I saw.
I create my own destiny, and this prophecy of yours is just a small part of it.
and general delusion at the prospects of being returned home, he continues to seek an opportunity to slay Hatred's heart, the daughter of Hatred, with his new army at his back. Indeed, even in Act 1 when we're in Kor Valar, we can see that Inarius and his forces are aware that Caldeum will most likely eventually be Lilith's target, because if we interact with the war table there, we can see that their planned military actions revolve around the city. They are most likely aware of this because Inarius also knows about the Hellgate, hence why he goes to Rathma for the Hell Key himself. Lilith's aims are simply to become powerful and rule over Sanctuary and Hell alike, but she also wants to defeat the Prime Evils, which is where her aims and those of Elias intersect. And thus her plan comprises of gaining access to Hell in order to absorb her weakened father's essence, and in the meantime, she also intends to build allies. For the first aim, she takes a key from the corpse of her son, a key to Hell, and she strikes a deal with Astaroth, a servant of her father, who will eventually grant her passage to the Cathedral of Hatred, the location where Mephisto will eventually reform. In regards to gaining allies in the meantime, she builds her cult on Earth, and uses Elias to summon two powerful hellish allies, the Lesser Evils Andariel, Maiden of Anguish, and Duriel, Lord of Pain. Of course, another motivation for summoning Andariel, especially for Elias, is to prepare Sanctuary for the coming of the Prime Evils, which apparently the prophecy is heralding the return of. And so Elias believes that they can harness Andariel's powers in defense of this world.
Andariel's power will be ours to wield against the other Lords of Hell.
Lilith later tries to convince you in the mind prison that she holds you in that this is her reasoning for all of her actions towards gaining power, to defeat the Prime Evils once and for all, starting with her father. Whether she is sincere in her desire to defend Sanctuary, or whether she is just seeking power for power's sake, is open to interpretation. At the end of Act 2, you may wonder what Lilith is waiting for. After all, she has both things she needs to enter Hell and devour her father. Well, the answer comes when we spy on her with the Sightless Eye, in which she finally senses that her father is reforming.
My father's essence is reforming.
How do you know?
I feel it. Like 1,000 old wounds ripped open again. He is still weak, vulnerable. I must strike before he can resist.
And this is why she has bided her time, making allies and looking to summon the Lesser Evils as support, because she needed to wait for Mephisto to reform before she can absorb him, obviously. And so, as the Wanderer with our Haradrim allies, we make preparations to finally defeat her, and we do so by reforming a Soul Stone that will be used to capture and bind her essence. And we also take out her right-hand man, Elias, by discovering his source of immortality and finally claiming his head. We also defeat her lesser evil allies, Andariel and later Neyrelle. A Hellgate lies beneath Caldeum, and the city falls to her cult's influence, so it welcomes her with open arms. She then enters Hell using the key that she has taken, and gathers her forces, marching upon her father's domain. Yet Inarius also makes his move at the same time. Lilith has revealed herself, and so Inarius sees a chance for the prophecy to be fulfilled. He goes after her, leading his army of human devotees on a crusade against Caldeum, slaughtering everyone inside, whether they be guilty of being in the cult or not. Inarius and his army then charge headlong into the Hell portal after Lilith. Inarius' army initially has some success, especially when encouraged by their messiah's presence, and as demon and human clash, Inarius pursues Lilith into the citadel. Inarius reveals his hatred towards his own creation. He calls Sanctuary an abomination, and how this character has changed from the nuanced and rebellious person that met Lilith all those millennia ago. And yet, Inarius has suffered torment we couldn't possibly imagine, for a time that we couldn't possibly imagine, by Mephisto. And now, in his mind, Sanctuary is the reason for all his suffering, for the reason he has been abandoned by his kin. Creating Sanctuary and making that choice was the reason the angels abandoned him and handed him over to Mephisto, and thus he thinks that by killing his own children, like Rathma, and killing his former lover, he will begin to make things right, quote unquote. He hates Sanctuary and he hates humanity. To him, they are the cause of his suffering. Instead of taking responsibility for his own choices, he assigns blame. The Inarius we learned of in the Sin War storyline, a strong character full of conviction, is gone. We now have a pathetic reflection. Mephisto has truly broken him, and he just wants to go home. Sad face. In their final confrontation, Lilith gives Inarius a hard reality check. The heavens simply don't care about him anymore, because he did something they will never forgive. He made a choice. Angels are beings of pure instinct. They are beings of light, and Inarius had the audacity to make a choice, to use free thinking, to go against his nature and do something different, to create something for himself. And they will never forgive that. And as such, they give him the cruelest punishment possible. As Lilith puts it,
We made a choice, and that they can never forgive. No matter what you tell yourself, or who you sacrifice.
Silence is their judgment.
But I set things right. What more would you have me do? Tell me, please.
this judgment has made him extremely despondent. He feels alone. He is abandoned. Nothing he does in the eye of the high heavens will redeem him. They do not rejoice at his actions. They are beneath their notice. He is nothing to the high heavens now. He doesn't belong there anymore. Something he cannot accept. In his rage, he does stab Lilith. Through the abdomen, not through the heart. And in his despondency, he is distracted. And instead of making sure Lilith is dead, he is pleading to the heavens. And as he does so, Lilith takes his spear out of her abdomen and stabs him right through the heart. A hateful heart being pierced by a spear of light. And as the prophecy foretold, he was the one bound in chains, and now he is freed from life. We discussed the prophecy in more detail in a prior video, which I will link below, so if you want to see why Inarius' heart being pierced is the fulfillment of the prophecy, then please check that out. Inarius' horrifying death scream breaks the heart of his army, which is massacred in the fields of hell following his fall. Inarius' empty armour is dragged down by the spirits of the damned, presumably to join them forever. Inarius is dead, his army destroyed, so it is up to us, the Wanderer, and our Haradrim allies to defeat Lilith. So we look into the Sightless Eye once more, and we watch Lilith being granted passage to Mephisto's hideout by Astaroth, the demon she made a deal with earlier in Act 2. It's all coming together for her. Lilith senses us watching her with the Sightless Eye, and now traps us within our own mind, but we are able to break free with Mephisto's help. He has of course been aiding us and guiding us this whole time to ostensibly prevent himself from being devoured. But of course there are clues that Mephisto has been manipulating events to play out this way the entire time.
They mentioned the Lord of Hatred.
But we will discuss that in a separate video. Donan is wounded by the tortured souls found within the Citadel and unfortunately dies a slow, painful death. Lorith is rattled by the death of his friend and trusts us to finish the job. With Neyrelle in tow, Mephisto gives us a portal that allows us to arrive at the Cathedral of Hatred and Mephisto's location before Lilith gets there. The previous plan was to stop Lilith by imprisoning her in the Soulstone, but Neyrelle believes that Mephisto is the greater enemy, and it is he who should be imprisoned by their Soulstone. Two birds with one stone, pun intended. We can contain Mephisto, and at the same time Lilith is denied Mephisto as long as we get away with his soul. Mephisto does a convincing "oh no, please don't imprison me" while twiddling his mustache. Neyrelle leaves by another portal, and instead we choose to stay behind to face Lilith once and for all. We cannot have her on our heels any longer. And after all, she has been wounded by Inarius, so this is the perfect time to take her down. We fight her in her mother form, then in her daughter of hatred form, and finally Lilith is killed, at least for the time being. It does seem true enough, as even the petals, her blood, seem to turn to ash, presumably implying that those petals we ingested at the beginning of the game are also destroyed, meaning we are no longer potentially corrupted by her blood. We bury Donan, but Neyrelle has disappeared. Prava survived the battle in hell, and seems to focus her anger at the loss of Inarius on the Haradrim. Angered that we took back the Soulstone and imprisoned Mephisto, she is issued a warrant against Lorith. We are forced to kill Yosef and his men, sadly killing the man who saved our life at the beginning of the game. Neyrelle has left us a letter in the Haradric vault, written in Haradric script for Lorath, who reads it. Neyrelle has left with the Mephisto Soulstone, and she intends to deal with it, keeping us safe. She doesn't tell him where she is travelling, but we see her travels. She leaves from the Haradric vault, then passes over the fractured peaks, then into the deserts of Kyrgyzstan, and finally comes to the coast. So to me her path is simple. She has travelled to the western coast from the Haradric vault, and she intends to cross the narrow sea to the western continent of Sanctuary. But why? Well, there are a few areas of significance on the western continent, so we can speculate a little. Perhaps she intends to take it to the Ariat crater, where the World Stone was destroyed years ago. Perhaps there is some power of significance there that she thinks she can use to destroy Mephisto. Or perhaps to Tristam, where Diablo manifested himself years ago. Again, perhaps she believes there's an answer to be found there. Only time will tell, but it's clear that Neyrelle believes there is an answer to be found there, a solution that will allow us to deal with a prime evil in a more permanent fashion. We can see Mephisto hounding her every step of her journey, but her journey is her choice. She isn't being manipulated, as Lorath makes it clear that Mephisto couldn't have influenced her yet.
No. It will take time for the corruption to spread from the stone. She must have left for a reason.
The game ends with the Wanderer preparing for what comes next, taking care of some loose ends, getting stronger, and allying themselves with the Tree of Whispers by helping collect its tithes, assuming that it'll be a strong ally in the conflicts to come. So thanks guys, that's my analysis of the Diablo 4 ending. Certainly a far grimmer ending than Diablo 3, but one that was very interesting, though it did leave a lot to be answered. A pretty savage end for Inarius, and I really like the way Mephisto was handled in this story. It's great to see another prime evil get some time in the limelight and have their character developed somewhat. But let me know your thoughts below guys. Do you disagree with my assessment? I know the story isn't that opaque, but there are certainly some parts open to interpretation. Let me know in the comments below what you want to see next in the next Diablo 4 expansion, and until next time guys, I will see you on the western coast of Sanctuary. Take care and have a wonderful hell.